me helping you go through question number 2A on the stoichiometry practice problems on a sheet that looks like this. I'm going to be doing problem 1A right there. Okay, so first you have to start off with the balanced equation. I'm not going to walk through completely how to balance this, but I'm just going to start with the balanced equation. You have two of these things that's called heptane. We won't worry about that. And it reacts with 22 oxygens to produce 14 molecules of carbon dioxide and 16 molecules of water. Alright, this is the balanced equation here. And what the question asks is what mass of water will be produced from 30 grams of oxygen. I'm going to start with just writing out what I know underneath the substance where it's represented in the equation. I have 30 grams of oxygen, and I'm trying to figure out how many grams of water are produced. I don't know this. Okay? Now, as we talked about, these ratios are not gram ratios. This represents 22 moles makes 16 moles of water. So what we have to do is go down into our mole tunnel here. I'm going to need to use this number to figure out how many moles of oxygen is in 30 grams. And then once I know that, then I'll be able to figure out how many moles of H2O that can produce. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to use the mole ratio. Okay? And then once I do know, I'll write ratio in here, and once I do know that, I'll be able to figure out how many grams that number of moles weighs. Now, I'm going to label these with a couple of different things. You can think of this is how heavy, this here is how many, figuring out how many from that, and then figuring out how heavy the product is. I'm going to label it also with a 1. I'm going to do step 1 right here. So step 1 is using the given 30 grams. And we know in order to get to the number of moles of oxygen, I'm going to need to have grams in the bottom and moles in the top. I'm going to use the molar mass of oxygen. It's 32.0 grams of oxygen for 1 mole of oxygen. Now, no, you're thinking, wait, isn't it 16? But remember, 1 mole of oxygen contains 2 oxygen atoms. Each one is 16, therefore the total is 32 grams of oxygen for 1 mole. 30 divided by 32 is probably going to give us a number a little less than 1. It's going to give us a number that's 0.9375 moles of oxygen. Okay, so now I know how many moles of oxygen I have. Then I'm going to use the mole ratio that's represented by the equation to help us. That's what I'm going to call step 2. Step 2, I'm going to go from 0.9375 moles of oxygen, and I know that for every 22 moles of oxygen, I get out 16 moles of water. Okay, so if I do this, I get out 0.6818 moles of water. Okay, so this means that if I put in 0.9375 moles of oxygen, I'm going to get out 0.6818 moles of water. This amount of water is produced from this amount of oxygen. Okay, so I need to go on to step 3. Step 3 is taking this amount and figuring out how much it weighs, going from how many to how heavy. 0.6818 moles of H2O, and to know that 1 mole of H2O is equal to 18.02 grams of H2O, and this ends up being 1.1229 grams of H2O. I look at this number and I look at my starting number and I have to compare significant figures. 2 significant figures here. I should only get 2 significant figures at the end. So the answer is 12 grams of H2O. Okay. That's how you do that question. I'm going to give you a clue on how to approach question 2B. Once again, writing out, starting with the chemical equation here. Instead, the question says how many grams of oxygen are needed to produce 5 moles of CO2. I'm not starting with grams of CO2. I'm starting with how many moles of it I have. And I'm going to need to go to moles of oxygen to grams of oxygen. You're already starting down here. You don't. If you're already in the mole tunnel, just go across. You don't need to dig down there. Okay? Good luck, everybody, and please email me, askmrchan@gmail.com with questions.